She was abandoned at the altar, pure humiliated in front of everyone. But then the most powerful man in the country appeared and claimed her as his. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what happens next will surprise you. The French lace wedding dress had cost 3 months of savings, but now it was soaked with tears as Emily stood alone at the altar of St. Michael's Church, surrounded by 300 guests whispering in shock. The groom hadn't shown up, no message, no explanation, just the deafening silence of a phone that wouldn't ring and a bouquet of white roses trembling between her frozen fingers. Emily was only 20 years old, worked as a teaching assistant at an elementary school in Charleston, and had believed him when he said they would build a simple life together. She never imagined that the man with whom she had shared dreams for 3 years would simply disappear on the most important day of their lives. The sweet perfume of magnolia blossoms decorating the hall mixed with the smell of shame that seemed to emanate from her own skin, as pitying glances pierced her like invisible blades. Her mother, Dorothy, a woman with calloused hands who had spent her life sewing quilts to support the family, collapsed in sobs in the front pew. Her father, William, retired and frail, tried to maintain his composure as he loosened his borrowed tie. They were a humble family from the historic district, where tradition still weighed like golden chains, and being abandoned at the altar was a stain no soap could remove. Emily felt the world divide in two, the before and the after. Before was luminous, full of promises whispered beneath the Ravenel Bridge lit by moonlight, walks along the Battery where the harbour sang songs of hope. After was this black void, opening beneath her feet like a precipice. "Honey, let's get you out of here," Dorothy whispered, her voice broken like antique crystal. "You don't deserve these judging eyes." But Emily couldn't move. Her legs were lead, her lungs couldn't find enough air. The organist, an elderly man who had known her family for 3 generations, had stopped playing half an hour ago. The silence was worse than any funeral dirge. When she finally managed to leave the church, the June sun struck her with almost physical violence. Charleston's cobblestone streets had never seemed so narrow, so suffocating. Every corner knew her name, every window held curious eyes behind lace curtains. The city that had watched her grow now looked at her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. That night in her small bedroom that smelled of lavender and old books, Emily removed the dress with trembling hands. Each button she unfastened was a broken promise. Each layer of tulle that fell to the floor was a dream that evaporated. She looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Swollen eyes, pale lips, and something deeper, something broken in the expression that once radiated hope. Ryan had been her first love, her only certainty in an uncertain world. They had met in college. He studied accounting and she studied education. He was kind, predictable, safe. Or at least that's what she believed. How had she been so blind? What signs had she ignored while planning the color of the napkins and choosing the flowers? Revenge is poison you drink, hoping the other person will die. But Emily didn't seek revenge. She sought understanding. She sought to breathe without her chest hurting. She sought to wake up without the first word in her mind being why. The following months were like walking through an invisible minefield. Emily became the subject of every corner, every stall at the city market, every Sunday mass at the cathedral. Neighbors averted their eyes when she passed on the narrow cobblestone streets. Former friends stopped returning her calls. She, who had always been known for her purity, her dedication to studies, her kindness with the children at school, now carried an invisible but palpable label, the rejected one. "Did you see poor Emily?" she heard Mrs. Anderson murmur at the bakery on King Street. "They say he left with another woman. She must have done something for him to run away like that." The words hit her like stones. It was always this way. The woman was always to blame, even when she was the victim. Emily clenched her fists inside the pockets of her worn cardigan and kept walking, head held high, though her heart was in pieces. At school, the children were her only refuge. Little ones 6 and 7 years old who didn't understand social scandals, who only knew that Miss Emily had a warm smile and read stories with different voices for each character. Lily, a girl with enormous eyes and messy braids, gave her a drawing where Emily appeared surrounded by butterflies. "So you won't be sad, Miss Emily," she said with childish seriousness, Butterflies bring luck. Emily kept that drawing on her desk like a talisman against the darkness surrounding her. At night, when loneliness weighed like a marble slab on her chest, she would look at it and remember there was goodness in the world, even if it came in the form of poorly sharpened crayons and clumsily drawn hearts. Her father, William, didn't talk about it. He simply sat in his rocking chair on the porch full of ferns, smoking his pipe and gazing toward the harbor in the distance. But Emily knew he suffered. Each new wrinkle on his weathered face was a map of the pain he carried for her. Dorothy, on the other hand, took refuge in the kitchen. She prepared shrimp and grits, she-crab soup, pecan pie, sweet tea, as if she could feed the sadness until it was satisfied. The two ate in silence, the clinking of silverware against old china, the only sound in that house that had once overflowed with wedding preparations. "Honey, time heals everything," Dorothy would say while drying dishes with an embroidered cloth. "You'll see how it passes." But Emily knew there were wounds that time didn't heal. It only taught you to live with them. Like the scars from scraped knees in childhood, they remained there, permanent reminders of past falls. One October afternoon, while walking through Marion Square where leaves fell like golden tears, Emily stopped in front of the fountain. The water flowed constant, indifferent to human drama. How many people had passed through here with broken hearts? How many had moved forward? "Excuse me, are you Emily Carter, the teacher?" The voice startled her. It was deep, with an accent that revealed refined education but southern roots. Emily turned and found herself facing a tall man, impeccably dressed in a dark grey suit that must have cost more than her 3-month salary. His eyes were an intense brown, and there was something in them that made her feel as if he could see directly through the masks we all wear. "I am," she responded cautiously, aware of her simple dress and worn flats. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know you. My name is Daniel Harrison." The name echoed in her mind like distant thunder. Daniel Harrison, the tycoon, the man who appeared on the covers of Forbes magazine, whose name was synonymous with power and wealth throughout America. What was someone like him doing talking to her in a Charleston square? "What do you want?" she asked, her voice firmer than expected. Daniel smiled, and it was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, as if it were rusty from disuse. "To talk. Just that. Would you give me a few minutes?" The Charleston Place Hotel rose majestically over the city like a guardian of glass and elegance. Emily had never been to a place like this. The ceilings seemed like works of art, the crystal chandeliers gleamed like captured constellations, and the aroma of exotic spices mixed with expensive perfumes floated in the air like a promise of worlds she only knew from books. Daniel guided her to a private terrace overlooking the harbor, sailboats gently rocking under the evening light, like teeth of some ancient god. A waiter dressed in black appeared silently, leaving fine crystal glasses and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Emily's monthly rent. "I don't drink alcohol," she said, hands folded in her lap. "But thank you." "Sparkling water, then," Daniel ordered without missing a beat, with lemon. The ease with which he navigated this world of luxury made her feel even more out of place. Emily wore the same navy blue dress she wore for parent-teacher conferences. Her shoes showed signs of having been repaired more than once, and her hair, though clean, lacked the shine of expensive salons. "Why am I here?" she asked directly, tired of games. "A man like you doesn't invite an elementary school teacher to a place like this without reason." Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her conscious of every breath. "I've been watching you for months," he said without preamble. "I know what happened at the church. I know how this city has treated you. And I know that you are much more than the label they're trying to put on you." Emily felt blood rush to her cheeks, half indignation, half something more complex she didn't want to name. "You've been spying on me." "Observing," he corrected. "There's a difference. You see, Emily, I grew up on these streets. My mother, Grace, worked as a housekeeper in the mansions on South Battery. I was raised among the leftovers of the rich and the disdainful looks of those who thought themselves superior simply for being born in the right bed." There was a hardness in his voice that spoke of old scars, well hidden beneath the veneer of success. "I built my empire from nothing," he continued, "and at every step of the way, I saw wasted talent, potential crushed by the limitations others impose. You, Emily, have something I've seen in very few people: true resilience. Not the pose, not the facade, the real essence. You don't know me, she replied, defensiveness rising like a shield. You've seen a version of me. A broken version on a bad day repeated 200 times. Exactly, Daniel said, leaning forward. And on those 200 bad days, you kept going to that school, kept teaching those children, kept holding your head high, even as the world pushed you down. That's not weakness. That's strength in its purest form. The waiter brought a tray with delicate appetizers. Olives, prosciutto, aged cheese. Emily tried an olive, its salty flavor anchoring her to the reality of this surreal moment. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked. Daniel pulled a leather folder from his briefcase. He slid it across the glass table until it was in front of her. Emily opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were documents, charts, projections. Everything related to education, with innovative programs, with budgets that made her catch her breath. "I run a foundation," he explained, "focused on transforming education in marginalized communities across America. I need someone who truly understands what it means to teach from the heart, someone who sees students as people, not as numbers. I need an educational director." "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a purpose," he corrected. "A salary 10 times your current one. Travel between New York, Chicago, San Francisco. Unlimited resources to implement your ideas. And something more important, a voice. A platform from which your story isn't one of shame, but of transformation." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Emily looked out the window toward Charleston, her city, her prison, her home. The lights were beginning to come on like fireflies in the growing twilight. Could she really leave everything behind? "Why me?" she whispered. "Really, why?" Daniel was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming softly on the table. "Because when I saw my mother cry in the kitchen after doctors explained her diagnosis in terms she couldn't understand, I knew that education wasn't a luxury. It was dignity, it was power. And you, Emily, understand that in a way no ivory tower academic ever could." Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in her small room, staring at the cracked ceiling where shadows danced with light from the street lamps. The folder was open on her desk, its pages filled with possibilities that seemed to belong to someone else's life. Her mother knocked softly on the door at dawn. "Are you okay, honey?" Emily didn't know how to answer that. She hadn't been okay for 6 months. But this offer, this impossible opportunity, was like a crack of light in a wall of darkness that seemed eternal. "Mum, did you ever wish to be someone else?" she asked, her voice hoarse from sleepless hours. Dorothy entered, her worn robe smelling of fresh coffee and the lavender soap she'd used forever. She sat on the edge of the bed, her calloused hands taking Emily's. "Every day of my youth," she confessed. "I wanted to be a dancer, did you know? Ballet. I dreamed of stages in New York, maybe even Paris. But then your father came along, and then you, and life. Well, life had other plans. Do you regret it?" "Never," Dorothy said fiercely. "But Emily, I chose. No one took my dreams away. I traded them for others. Someone took something from you, and if this man is offering you a way to reclaim not what you lost, but something better, something truly yours, then maybe you should listen." Emily closed her eyes, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. Her mother's wisdom always surprised her, hidden under layers of tradition and duty, but there, shining like gold, hidden in the earth. At school that day, she observed her students with new attention. Lily, with her messy braids, biting her pencil while trying to solve a difficult problem. Tommy, always the first to raise his hand, even when he didn't know the answer. Sophie, so shy she whispered instead of speaking, but whose drawings were visual poems of color and emotion. Could she leave them? But then, how many Lilies, Tommies, and Sophies were there across America, in forgotten neighborhoods, in marginalized communities, waiting for someone to tell them they mattered? The question that defined a life wasn't, "Who will I leave behind?" but, "How many can I reach?" That afternoon, Emily called the number Daniel had left on his business card. The secretary put her through immediately, as if she'd been waiting. "Miss Carter?" Daniel's voice sounded different on the phone, less polished, more human. "I accept," Emily said before she could change her mind. "I accept your offer, but with one condition." "Which is?" "This can't be charity. It can't be you saving me. It has to be a real opportunity where I prove my worth, where I can fail if I'm not up to it. I don't want to be your rescue project." There was a pause, and when Daniel spoke again, Emily detected something like respect in his tone. "Deal. But prepare yourself, Emily. The world you're about to enter isn't kind. It will demand everything you have and more. Are you ready for that?" "No," she responded honestly, "but I will be." 2 weeks later, Emily stood at Charleston International Airport, a small suitcase containing everything she considered essential. Her father had hugged her without words, his moist eyes saying everything his pride wouldn't let him verbalize. Her mother had given her an embroidered handkerchief, the same one her grandmother had given her when she got married. "So you remember where you come from," Dorothy whispered. "No matter how high you fly." The flight to New York was short, but transformative. Emily looked out the window as Charleston became smaller and smaller, until it was just a dot in the vast landscape of the South. She felt as if she were leaving behind an old skin, a version of herself that no longer fit. Daniel was waiting for her at JFK, not with a driver but himself, his shirt sleeves rolled up, less intimidating than she remembered. "Welcome to your new life," he said simply. And Emily, for the first time in months, felt something like hope awakening in her chest like a flower after winter. The Harrison Foundation offices occupied 3 floors of a glass building in Midtown Manhattan, where the streets smelled of old money and new ambition. Emily showed up on her first day in a suit, bought hastily at a discount store, aware that she stood out among the designer suits and shoes that cost more than her monthly rent in Charleston. "Good morning, you must be the new educational director," said a tall woman in a Chanel suit with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Victoria Sterling, Deputy Director of Operations. Mr. Harrison asked me to bring you up to speed." The way she said "new director" carried a barely veiled undertone of skepticism. Emily caught it immediately. Here she wasn't the respected teacher from the historic district. She was the newcomer, the unknown, the one Daniel had brought from nowhere. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, PowerPoint presentations, budgets with more zeros than Emily had ever seen in her life. She learned that the foundation operated in 15 states, had partnerships with universities in Boston and California, that its impact was measured in metrics and KPIs that made her head hurt. But more than the numbers, what hurt was the look from some employees, whispers in the hallway that fell silent when she passed, muffled laughter when she asked a question they considered basic. It was like being back in Charleston after the wedding, only here the judgment came wrapped in professional courtesy. "Is it true you were an elementary school teacher?" asked Marcus, a data analyst fresh out of Harvard Business School, his tone making elementary school teacher sound like a contagious disease. "This must be very different for you." Emily took a deep breath, counting to 10 in her mind. "Yes, it's different. There I taught children to read, to add, to dream of a better future. Here it seems the goal is the same, just with more Excel spreadsheets." The irony was lost on Marcus, but not on Daniel, who had been observing from across the conference room. Their eyes met for a moment, and Emily saw something like approval in his gaze before he returned to his conversation with Japanese investors. The nights in her new apartment in Chelsea were the hardest. The place was impeccable, modern, with appliances that took her days to learn how to use, but it lacked soul. There were no ferns on the balcony, no smell of her mother's coffee in the mornings, no distant sound of jazz floating from the clubs in Charleston. One night, after a particularly brutal meeting where her proposal for mobile libraries had been torn apart for lack of economic viability, Emily found herself crying in the shower, hot water mixing with tears of frustration. What was she doing here? Who did she think she was to think she could operate at this level? Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was just the little teacher from Charleston that Daniel had decided to rescue for reasons she didn't fully understand. Her phone vibrated with a message from her mother. "The children ask about you. Lily gave me a drawing to send you. She loves you." The attached image showed a child's drawing, Emily with wings flying over a rainbow. The words, "I miss you, Miss Emily," written in shaky letters. Something broke and reformed at the same time in Emily's chest. She remembered why she had accepted this. Not for the salary, not for the opportunity to escape Charleston's whispers. For the children, for all the children who deserved more than life had given them at birth. The next day, Emily entered the office with renewed determination. When Victoria began explaining why her project wasn't sustainable, Emily interrupted her. "With all due respect, Victoria, sustainable doesn't mean safe. Sustainable means it endures because it matters. And if we're here just to do safe things that look good in annual reports, then we're wasting resources. The silence in the conference room was so thick it could be cut. Victoria blinked, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. Excuse me, are you telling me how to do my job? I'm saying my job isn't to make numbers look pretty. It's to change lives. And if that means taking calculated risks, then yes, I'm saying we should reconsider our definition of viability. Daniel, who had entered silently during the exchange, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a smile barely visible on his lips. Emily's right, he said simply. I approve the mobile library project. Victoria, I want an implementation plan by the end of the week. The victory was sweet, but Emily knew there was a price. She had just made enemies on her own team, but she had also discovered something important. Her voice mattered here, as much as it had mattered in that small classroom in Charleston. Emily had been in New York for 3 months when she received the call that would change everything again. It was a rainy December afternoon, the city covered in Christmas lights that seemed to mock her internal loneliness. She was reviewing proposals for a school in rural Mississippi when her phone showed an unknown number with a South Carolina area code. Hello? Emily, it's me, Ryan. The world stopped. 3 words, and suddenly she was back at that altar, in the lace dress with her heart shattered on the marble floor of the church. How did you get my number? Her voice came out firmer than expected. Your mother. Emily, I need to talk to you, please. I know I have no right, but could we meet? Every fiber of her being screamed to hang up, to block that number, to erase that voice from her life as he had tried to erase hers. But there was something in Ryan's tone, a desperation she recognized because she had felt it in her own throat for months. Why? She asked. Why now? Because I made the biggest mistake of my life. Because I owe you an explanation. Because I still love you, Emily. The words should have filled her with rage or satisfaction or something. Instead, she felt a deep exhaustion, as if every emotion had been squeezed until nothing remained but the echo of what she once felt. I'm in New York, she said finally. I'm not coming back to Charleston. Then I'll come there. Next weekend. Please, Emily, give me a chance to explain. After hanging up, Emily stood staring at the rain beating against her office windows. Why had she agreed? Masochism? Curiosity? Or maybe a part of her, the part that still believed in the happy endings of the stories she read to her students, needed closure. Daniel found her like that, lost in thought, when he arrived with coffee and bagels from a famous deli near Times Square. You look like you've seen a ghost, he commented, placing the bag on her desk. Something like that, Emily admitted. My ex, the one who left me at the altar, he called. He wants to see me. Daniel's expression changed subtly, like clouds covering the sun. He set his own coffee cup down harder than necessary. And are you going to see him? I don't know, maybe. To get answers. Answers don't always bring peace, Emily. Sometimes they just bring more questions. There was something in his voice, a personal experience he wasn't sharing. Emily studied him, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. Daniel was always there, present but distant, generous but guarded. What secrets did he hide behind those eyes that saw too much? Did you? She started to ask, but he raised a hand. I have no right to have an opinion about your personal life, Emily. Just be careful. Men who abandon don't usually change. They just find new reasons to justify the same cowardice. Those words echoed in her mind for days. When Ryan arrived that Saturday, Emily waited for him at a neutral cafe in the village, far from the foundation, far from her apartment. Neutral territory for a conversation that promised to be anything but neutral. He arrived with cheap roses from a bodega and puppy dog apologetic eyes. He had let his beard grow, had lost weight, wore the same leather jacket Emily remembered from their college days. It was like looking at a faded photograph of a life that no longer existed. Thank you for coming, Ryan said, sitting down awkwardly, his knees hitting the small table. You have 10 minutes, Emily responded, not touching the coffee she had ordered. Explain to me why. Don't give me excuses. Give me the truth. Ryan took a deep breath, his hands trembling around his cup. I was scared. Scared I wasn't enough for you. Scared of commitment. Scared of everything. And on the wedding day, I woke up in my apartment and couldn't move. It was like my body refused to cooperate. Fear, Emily repeated, her voice dangerously calm. You humiliated me in front of 300 people, destroyed my family's reputation, ruined my life. Because of fear. I know, he whispered. I know, and there's no excuse enough. I've lived these months in hell, Emily. I quit my job, can't sleep, can't think about anything but what I did to you. Good, Emily said, and the word came out like a sharp blade. I'm glad you suffer. I'm glad you can't sleep, because I couldn't either. For months, Ryan, months wondering what I'd done wrong, what part of me was so repulsive that you preferred the shame of running to the idea of marrying me. Nothing. You did nothing wrong. The problem is me, it's always been me. That doesn't comfort me. Broken people don't have the right to break others just because they can't fix themselves. Silence. A heavy silence, loaded with years of what could have been and never would be. Why are you really here, Ryan? Emily finally asked. You didn't travel from Charleston to apologize. You could have done that over the phone. He looked up, and there was real desperation in his eyes. Because I want another chance. Because I've changed. Because I love you, Emily, and I know we could... No, she interrupted, the word coming out clear and definitive as a bell. There is no we could. That version of us died at that altar. You killed it. Emily, please. No, she repeated, standing up. Thank you for the explanation, Ryan. I hope you find peace. But you won't find it with me. Not anymore. She left the cafe without looking back, leaving the cheap roses wilting on the table like a funeral for a love that would never exist again. The mobile library project became the heart of Emily's work. During the following months, she traveled through forgotten communities in Mississippi, Alabama, regions where children walked miles to reach schools with minimal resources. Each visit was a wound and a healing simultaneously. In a rural town in Alabama called Millerville, she met a girl named Elena, who reminded her so much of Lily that she had to hold back tears. Elena was 9 years old and had never owned her own book. When Emily handed her her first copy, an illustrated edition of The Little Prince, the girl hugged it to her chest as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. Is it really mine? Eleanor asked, her huge eyes filled with disbelief. It's really yours, Emily confirmed, her voice breaking slightly. And when you finish it, there are many more waiting for you. That night in a modest motel that smelled of lavender and old wood, Emily wrote a report that was more love letter than official document. She described not just impact metrics, but the expressions on the children's faces, the hunger for knowledge that shone in eyes society had forgotten, the infinite potential that awaited just an opportunity. Daniel read the report in his office in New York, and for the first time in years felt his money meant something more than numbers in bank accounts. He sent Emily a simple message. This is exactly what the foundation should be. Thank you. But not everything was progress and emotional moments. The Foundation's political reality was a minefield of egos, territorial budgets and power struggles that Emily was just beginning to understand. Victoria Sterling, in particular, had become increasingly hostile, questioning every one of Emily's decisions in public meetings, blocking resources she needed, sowing doubts about her competence among donors. She's just a small-town teacher playing at being an executive, Emily heard Victoria telling a group of associates at a fundraising cocktail party. She has no idea how this world really works. Daniel is blinded by... Well, we all know why. The insinuation was clear and poisonous, that there was something inappropriate between Emily and Daniel, that her position wasn't merited, but the result of personal favors. Emily confronted Victoria the next day in her office, closing the door with a definitive click. I know what you said last night, she began, her voice controlled but her eyes burning. And you're right about one thing. I don't come from the same world as you. I didn't study at prestigious business schools. Don't have contacts on Wall Street. Don't know what wine to order to impress investors. Victoria looked at her with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Then you admit you don't belong here? No, Emily corrected. I admit I'm different. But I belong here more than you because I know why we do this. It's not for annual bonuses or to add lines to a resume. It's because there are children in Millerville and 1,000 towns like it who deserve better. And if my lack of sophistication is what stands between them and that opportunity, then I'll leave. But I won't tolerate you questioning my integrity or Daniel's. Victoria seemed surprised by the ferocity in Emily's voice. "Look," she said with a sigh, "none of this is personal." "Of course it's personal," Emily interrupted. "Everything that matters in this life is personal. The numbers on your spreadsheets are people. The projects we approve or reject are destinies, and if you've forgotten that, then maybe you're the one who shouldn't be here." She left the office with trembling hands from adrenaline, not knowing if she had just won a battle or started a war she couldn't afford to lose. That night, Daniel invited her to dinner at a discreet restaurant in the West Village. It wasn't like that first dinner at Charleston Place. It was more intimate, more real. They ate mac and cheese and drank California wine, and for the first time, they talked not as founder and employee, but as two people who had seen too much of life's dark sides. "Victoria called me today," Daniel said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "She said you threatened her." "I didn't threaten her," Emily corrected. "I told her the truth." Daniel smiled, and it was a genuine smile without the armor he normally wore. "You know I support you, right? Not just as director of the foundation, as someone who admires you." There was something in the way he said it, an additional weight to the words that made Emily's heart beat faster. "Daniel, don't say anything," he interrupted gently. "I just needed you to know. You're free to do what you want with that information. But after months of watching you fight for every child, for every project, for every inch of ground in a world that doesn't make it easy for you, I needed you to know you're not alone." Emily felt tears stinging her eyes, and she let them fall without shame. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted. "With you, with all of this." "You don't have to do anything," he responded. "Just don't give up. Not on the work, not on yourself. The rest will find its way." But the universe had other plans. 2 weeks later, a scandal exploded in the press. Leaked documents suggested Daniel had brought Emily from Charleston under questionable motives, that he had rescued a vulnerable woman for his own benefit. The implications were dirty and destructive. The foundation went into crisis. Donors withdrew funds. The board of directors demanded explanations. And Emily found herself once again at the center of a media storm, this time not as the abandoned bride, but as the alleged mistress of a tycoon who had used his power inappropriately. None of it was true, but truth mattered little when lies were juicier. The newspapers were merciless. The New York Times published an article with the headline, "Philanthropy or Romance?" The Harrison Scandal. The Wall Street Journal called her the teacher who climbed using more than her credentials. Morning television shows debated her relationship with Daniel as if they were dissecting a third-rate soap opera. Emily stopped reading the news after the third day, but couldn't avoid the whispers in the office, the sidelong glances on the subway, the way restaurants fell silent when she entered. It was Charleston multiplied by 1,000, a public humiliation on a national scale. The foundation's board of directors called an emergency meeting. Emily was summoned to testify, to defend her position, to explain how a simple elementary school teacher had risen so high so fast. Every question was loaded with insinuations. Every answer she gave was twisted to fit the narrative they had already decided. "Miss Carter," said Dr. Arthur Lawson, a 70-year-old man with inherited fortune and airs of superiority, "do you deny that Mr. Harrison showed personal interest in your case before hiring you?" "He showed interest in my capacity as an educator," Emily responded, her hands folded on the mahogany table. "In my commitment to marginalized students. That's all. And the fact that he invited you to private dinners, provided you with an apartment in Chelsea, gave you access to social events where normally I wouldn't belong," Emily completed, her patience running out. "That's what you're insinuating, isn't it? That a woman like me doesn't deserve to be in spaces like these unless she negotiated somehow." The silence in the room was tense as a rope about to snap. "Miss Carter, no one is insinuating." "Yes, you are," Emily interrupted, standing up. "All of you are. And you know what? You're right about one thing. I don't belong here. Not in a room full of people who measure human worth in contacts, inheritances, and zip codes. But I belong in those classrooms in Millerville, in those forgotten communities, with those children you can't even locate on a map." "Are you resigning?" "Doctor," Lawson asked, with a tone suggesting it would be best for everyone. Emily looked around the table. Stone faces, cold eyes, people who had never known the uncertainty of not knowing if there would be food on the table or if they could pay rent. and she realized something. She didn't need their approval. "No," she said finally. "I'm not resigning. But if you decide my work here must end because of a fabricated scandal, then that will be your decision, not mine." She left the boardroom without waiting for permission, without looking back. In the hallway, she leaned against the cold wall, breathing deeply, trying not to vomit from adrenaline and fear. Daniel found her there minutes later. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice loaded with guilt. "This is my fault. I should have been more careful, should have—" "No," Emily interrupted him. "Don't apologize for helping me, or for believing in me. If the world wants to see something dirty in that, the problem is the world's, not ours." He looked at her with an intensity that made her conscious of every heartbeat. "You're stronger than I thought," he said softly. "And I already thought you were the strongest person I knew." But strength had its limits. That night in her apartment, Emily finally collapsed. She cried for Charleston, for the altar, for Ryan, for the lies in the newspapers, for the constant battle of having to prove her worth in a world that judged her before knowing her. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "Honey, I saw the news. Are you okay?" The concern in Dorothy's voice broke Emily's last dam of self-control. "No, Mom, I'm not okay. I don't know if I can keep doing this." "Come home," Dorothy said simply. "Just for a few days. Remember who you are, where you came from, and then decide." Emily took the first train to Charleston the next morning. As the planes passed by the window, she felt as if she were traveling not just toward her home, but toward a previous version of herself, one she had left behind, but perhaps needed to find again. Charleston received her with grey February skies and the familiar aroma of salt air mixed with the scent of honeysuckle. Emily walked from the train station to the historic district, every corner a memory, every street an old wound that had stopped bleeding but never stopped aching. Her family home was exactly as she had left it, small, modest, full of love accumulated in every corner. Dorothy waited at the door, arms open, and Emily collapsed into them like a child returning from a nightmare. "There now, my girl. You're home now." The simple words were balm on wounds Emily didn't know she still had. They ate shrimp and grits in silence, the kind of food that feeds more than the stomach. William entered, his grey moustache trembling, and hugged his daughter without saying anything, because there were no words necessary. That night, Emily climbed to the widow's walk on the roof, where the lights of Charleston Harbor glimmered in the distance like golden promises in the darkness. She remembered when she was a child, when she looked at those same lights and dreamed of adventures that seemed impossibly distant. When had she stopped dreaming and started just surviving? The next day, without really planning it, Emily walked to her old school. It was Saturday, but she knew the principal, Mrs. Robertson, was often there on weekends, preparing materials for the coming week. She found her exactly where she expected, in the small office that smelled of old coffee and persistent hope. "Emily!" Mrs. Robertson rose with difficulty from her chair, her knees protesting. "It's been so long. I've read about you in the papers." Emily braced herself for judgment, for disappointment, for invasive questions, but Mrs. Robertson simply hugged her. "Don't believe a word those vultures say," she whispered. "I taught you, girl. I know what you're made of." The tears Emily had been holding since New York finally released. She cried in the arms of this woman who had watched her grow, who had taught her that teaching wasn't just transmitting knowledge, but igniting sparks in young souls. "I don't know if I can go back," Emily admitted when she could finally speak. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." Mrs. Robertson held her by the shoulders, her grey but penetrating eyes locking onto Emily's. "Strength isn't not feeling fear, Emily. It's feeling it and going forward anyway. Do you remember Lily?" Emily nodded. How could she forget? "She came by yesterday asking about you. She showed me a book she said you sent her. She's read it 5 times. 5, Emily. And now she wants to be a teacher like you. Do you understand what that means?" Emily understood. She understood that her impact wasn't measured in newspaper headlines or board approvals. It was measured in 7-year-old girls who discovered their dreams mattered. "Can I stay here a while?" Emily asked. "Just be?" "All the time you need, honey." Emily spent the next few hours in her old classroom, now occupied by another teacher, but essentially unchanged. The small wooden desks, the green chalkboard that needed replacing a decade ago, the children's drawings taped to the walls. Everything was humble, limited, imperfect. And yet, In this space, minds had flourished, imaginations had been ignited, seeds of better futures had been planted. Her phone vibrated. Message from Daniel. The board voted. You stay. But not because of them, because of you. Come back when you're ready. Emily looked at the message for a long time, then she wrote, Thank you. I needed this. That night, she walked to Marion Square where she had met Daniel months ago. The place seemed different now. Or maybe she was different. She sat on the edge of the fountain, listening to the water flow, and for the first time in weeks felt something like peace. A group of teenagers passed by laughing, their voices filling the air with that carefree certainty of youth. Emily watched them and remembered being like that once before broken dreams and painful lessons. But she also realized she wouldn't change anything, not even the hardest parts, because every wound had brought her exactly where she needed to be. Her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number but local to Charleston. Hello? Emily, this is Anna from the bakery near your house. Your mother gave me your number. Look, I know it's not my place, but everyone here in the neighborhood is proud of you. It doesn't matter what they say on TV. You're one of us and we're with you. The voice broke at the end, and Emily felt her own chest tighten. Thank you, Anna. You don't know how much that means. After hanging up, Emily realized something fundamental. She had spent so much time seeking validation from people in ivory towers that she had forgotten her real tribe had always been here, on these streets, among these people who knew the taste of struggle and the value of perseverance. She returned to New York 3 days later, but she wasn't the same woman who had fled. She carried with her the smell of the earth of her childhood, the strength of women like her mother and Mrs. Robertson, the clarity of knowing exactly why she fought. The foundation had survived the media storm, but the scars were visible. Several smaller donors had withdrawn, the team was divided, and the atmosphere in the office was so tense it could be cut with a knife. Emily returned to her desk, determined not to be intimidated, but aware that every move would be observed, analyzed, judged. Victoria was surprisingly civil in their first interaction after Emily's return. Welcome back, she said, her tone neutral. We have a lot of backlogged work. Emily nodded, not lowering her guard. She knew snakes too well. The most dangerous ones weren't those that hissed, but those that slithered silently. It was Daniel who discovered the truth, almost by accident. He was reviewing archived emails for another matter when he found a chain of messages between Victoria and a journalist from the New York Times, the same one who had published the most damaging article about Emily. The emails were explicit. Victoria had leaked internal information, had distorted facts, had actively orchestrated the smear campaign. But there was more. Digging deeper, Daniel discovered connections to the Romano family, his business rivals from Boston. Bank documents showed payments to Ryan, Emily's ex-fiancé, dated weeks before the failed wedding. The abandonment hadn't been spontaneous cowardice. It had been bought, paid for, executed with precision to destroy Emily at her most vulnerable moment. And everything connected. Victoria had been placed in the foundation 2 years earlier by the Romanos, a corporate espionage move disguised as legitimate hiring. Her objective was simple: sabotage Daniel from within, and Emily had been the perfect instrument to do it. When Daniel showed Emily the documents in his office, she felt as if the floor disappeared beneath her feet. I want you to read this, he said, his voice tense with contained rage. And then I want you to tell me how to proceed. Emily read. Every email was a stab, every bank transaction a revelation of how carefully they had constructed her humiliation. Ryan had received $50,000 to abandon her. $50,000. The price of her dignity, apparently. I'm going to destroy them, Daniel said when she finished reading, his jaw tight. I have enough evidence to ruin Victoria, Ryan, the entire Romano family. I can make sure they never work in this city, in this country again. No, Emily interrupted, her voice strangely calm. Daniel looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. No? Emily, they deliberately shattered you. They turned your life into hell as a corporate chess move, and you want me to do nothing. I didn't say do nothing, she corrected. I said don't destroy them. There's a difference. She stood and walked to the window, looking at New York stretching under the gray March sky. The city teemed with millions of lives, each with their own battles, their own wounds. If you destroy them, Daniel, what do you become? What do I become? she said without turning around. Revenge is seductive. It promises satisfaction, closure, justice. But all it really gives you is a black hole where there should be healing. Then what do you propose? He asked, genuinely confused. Emily turned, and there was a clarity in her eyes he had never seen before. I propose we use this information for what it is. Evidence that they tried to break us and failed. That we expose Victoria and fire her, yes, but without media fanfare. That we give Ryan the opportunity to return the money and disappear quietly. And as for the Romanos, that we show them their strategy not only failed, but made us stronger. That's too generous, Daniel said, though there was admiration in his tone. It's not generosity, Emily corrected. It's strategy. They wanted to turn us into victims, into scandals, into distractions from our real work. If we give them the spectacle of a public war, they win even in defeat. But if we simply move forward, stronger, more focused, more successful, then they truly lose. Daniel walked toward her, and for the first time Emily saw real vulnerability in his eyes. I don't know how you have this clarity after everything they did to you, he said softly. Because I've already been at the bottom, Daniel. At that altar with 300 people looking at me like I was a circus freak, and I survived. If I could survive that, I can survive anything. And more than survive, I can choose who I want to be after the storm. And I choose not to be someone who lets bitterness define me. There was a moment suspended in time where the world reduced to just the two of them. Daniel raised his hand, almost touching Emily's face, but stopped. You're extraordinary, he whispered. And not in the superficial sense people usually use. Extraordinary in the way that really matters. Emily felt something break and reform in her chest, like ice melting after too long a winter. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. There was work to do, wounds to heal completely, a version of herself she was still finding. Give me time, she said softly. Not because I don't feel something, but because I need to be whole first. For myself. Does that make sense? Daniel lowered his hand and nodded. All the sense in the world. Victoria was quietly fired the next day. There was no dramatic scene, no public accusations. Just a private conversation where she was presented with the evidence and given the option to resign with neutral references or face legal action. She chose the former, her arrogance finally tamed by the weight of her own actions. Ryan received a certified letter giving him 30 days to return the money. Emily never knew if he did. It no longer mattered. She had closed that chapter of her life so completely, it was like a book in a language she no longer understood. And as for the Romanos, Daniel simply doubled his operations in Boston, opening 3 new educational facilities in areas they had been ignoring. It wasn't revenge. It was demonstrating that the best triumph is building something bigger than what they tried to destroy. Spring came to New York with an explosion of cherry blossoms in Central Park and days that stretched like fulfilled promises. Emily completed 1 year at the foundation, and in that time the mobile library project had grown exponentially. They now operated in 20 states, had distributed over 50,000 books, and had touched lives in ways reports could never fully quantify. Emily received an invitation to give a talk at TEDx New York. The topic, Education as an Act of Resistance. She accepted with trembling hands, aware that she would be standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people, exposing herself again to public judgment. The night before the talk, she practiced in front of the mirror in her apartment. Her reflection returned the gaze of a woman she recognized and didn't recognize at the same time. She was still Emily Carter from the historic district, but she was also someone more, someone who had been broken and rebuilt, with the pieces glued with gold, like the Japanese technique of kintsugi. On the day of the talk, the Apollo Theater was packed. Emily climbed onto the stage in a simple but elegant dress, with no jewelry except her mother's embroidered handkerchief tied discreetly around her wrist. The spotlight blinded her momentarily, but then her eyes adjusted and she saw the expectant faces. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "My name is Emily Carter, and just over a year ago, I was abandoned at the altar in front of 300 people. The silence in the theater was absolute. I don't start with that to generate pity," she continued, "but because that experience taught me something fundamental, that the moment when the world sees you at your weakest can become the catalyst for your greatest strength. but only if you choose it to be so. For the next 18 minutes, Emily spoke without notes, without a shield, without pretense. She spoke of Lily and Elena, of forgotten communities and wasted potential, of how education wasn't just learning to read, but learning to dream boldly. She spoke of her own falls and rises, of the temptation of bitterness and the conscious choice of hope. True education, she concluded, her voice resonating in the space, is teaching people not just what they can be, but that they have the right to be it. And that begins when we ourselves believe it so deeply that no abandonment, no scandal, no voice saying you're not enough can extinguish that certainty. The ovation was thunderous. Emily descended from the stage with tears in her eyes, but they were tears of liberation, not pain. Daniel waited for her backstage. "That was," he began, but couldn't find words. "Terrifying?" Emily suggested with a tremulous smile. "Transformative," he corrected. For all of us who were listening, the following days were a whirlwind. The video of her talk went viral, accumulating millions of views. Schools across America invited her to speak. Universities wanted her to develop teacher training programs. Publishers approached with offers for a book. But more important than professional opportunities were the messages, thousands of them, from women who had been abandoned, betrayed, humiliated, from people who had felt less than their whole lives, from children in small towns who wrote to tell her they now believed their dreams mattered. One message in particular came from an email address Emily instantly recognized. Lily, her former student from Charleston, now 8 years old. "Miss Emily, I saw your talk on YouTube with my mum. She cried. So did I. I want to be brave like you. I love you. Lily." Emily printed that email and framed it in her office, next to the original butterfly drawing Lily had given her over a year ago. The mobile library project grew so much, they needed to hire a full team to manage it. Emily found herself mentoring young educators with the same fire she had, guiding them to avoid the mistakes she had made, but also encouraging them to take risks she never would have dared. One afternoon, while reviewing proposals in her office overlooking Fifth Avenue, Daniel entered with an expression Emily couldn't decipher. "What's wrong?" she asked, closing her laptop. "I received an offer," he said, sitting on the edge of her desk. "A pretty significant one." Emily felt her stomach contract. "What kind of offer?" "The government is launching a national education reform program. They want the foundation to lead the implementation. Budget of $50 million. Access to all public schools in the country. It's bigger than anything we've ever done." "That's incredible, Daniel. Why don't you look happy?" He looked directly into her eyes. "Because it requires the educational director to relocate to San Francisco for at least 2 years. Direct oversight, constant presence, and Emily, there's no one else who can do this. It's you. It has to be you." The world seemed to tilt slightly. San Francisco. 2 years. Just when she had found balance, purpose, something like peace. "It's a life-changing opportunity," Daniel continued. "Not just yours. Literally millions of students. But I understand if—" "I accept," Emily said before he could finish. "Are you sure? Because I don't want you to feel pressure." "I'm sure," she confirmed, though her heart beat like a war drum. "This is exactly why I do this. I can't refuse something like this because it's uncomfortable or scary. If I do that, I'm a hypocrite of everything I preach." Daniel smiled, but there was something sad in the expression. "I'm going to miss you," he said simply. "I'll be just a flight away," Emily responded, trying to maintain lightness. "And San Francisco isn't the end of the world." But they both knew 2 years could be. 2 years was enough time for people to change, drift apart, find other paths. "Emily," Daniel said, his voice taking a tone she had never heard before. "Before you go, I need to tell you something. Something I've been holding back because the moment never seemed right, and now I realize it maybe never will be." Emily felt the air thicken between them. "I'm listening. When I first saw you in that square in Charleston, it wasn't accidental. I'd been looking for you. I'd read about what happened at the wedding, and something in that story broke me. Because I saw in you my mother, all the people the world has unjustly judged. But then I got to know you, and you stopped being a symbol and became you. And Emily, at some point during these months, I fell in love with you. Not with your story, not with your potential. With you. With the way you bite your lip when you're thinking. How your eyes shine when you talk about the children. Your laugh that sounds like music I'd forgotten existed. Emily couldn't breathe. The words she had been half expecting, half dreading, finally spoken aloud. "Daniel, you don't have to answer," he interrupted. "I'm not putting this as a condition of anything. I just needed you to know before you left. Because life is too short, and opportunities are too scarce, and I would regret it for the rest of my life if I never told you that you're the reason I believe real love exists outside of movies." Tears fell down Emily's cheeks, but this time they weren't from pain. "I know," she whispered. "I've always known, I think. And I'm so scared of this because every time I've trusted someone, they've destroyed me. But Daniel, you're different, and I'm different now. And maybe 2 years in San Francisco isn't the end of something, but the beginning of proving that what we feel is strong enough to survive the distance." He moved closer, and this time he didn't stop. He took her face in his hands as if it were something precious and fragile. "What are we doing, Emily?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I want to find out. Do you?" Daniel's answer was a kiss that tasted of unspoken promises and possible futures, soft and deep at the same time, like coming home after a journey you thought would never end. The months before Emily's move to San Francisco were a strange mixture of intense professional activity and stolen moments of personal intimacy. She and Daniel navigated their new reality with the caution of people who had been hurt before and didn't want to repeat mistakes. It wasn't easy. Emily struggled with the vulnerability required to open herself completely to someone after being so publicly abandoned. Daniel, for his part, had his own demons. An ex-wife who had left him for a business partner, years of building emotional walls he now had to dismantle brick by brick. But they tried. Quiet dinners at small restaurants where no one recognized them, walks through Central Park where they talked about everything and nothing, nights where they simply sat in silence, reading in Daniel's apartment, Emily's feet in his lap, his hand absently caressing her ankle. "Do you ever regret it?" Emily asked one night, staring at the ceiling as they lay in bed after making love for the first time, an experience that had been tender and awkward and perfect in its imperfection. "Regret what?" Daniel murmured, his breath warm against her neck. "All of this. Bringing me to New York. Complicating your life with me." Daniel propped himself up on an elbow, looking at her with an intensity that made her feel completely seen. "Emily, you didn't complicate my life. You gave it meaning. Before you, I was just a wealthy man building more projects to fill a void I didn't know how to heal. Now I have a reason that goes beyond numbers." "Pretty words," she teased, though her voice trembled. "True words," he corrected, kissing her forehead. "The truest I've said in years." But the reality of San Francisco approached like an inevitable storm. Emily flew there 3 times for preparations, each visit showing her the magnitude of the challenge she had accepted. The government program wasn't just big. It was massive, complex, full of bureaucracy and politics that would make the Foundation's challenges seem like child's play. Her new team in San Francisco received her with professional skepticism. She was young. She was a woman. She came recommended by Daniel Harrison, which meant either she was brilliant or she had slept her way to the top, depending on who you asked. Emily felt the weight of those assumptions in every meeting, every presentation, every decision she made. "You can't win them all," Daniel told her during one of their nightly calls. "Just focus on doing the work so well that opinions become irrelevant." "Easy to say when you're a man," Emily responded, sharper than she intended. There was silence on the line. "You're right," Daniel said finally. "I'm sorry. I can't fully understand what you face because I've never had to prove everything twice simply because of my gender." The honesty of the admission disarmed her. "I'm sorry," Emily sighed. "It's just that I'm tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of proving. Tired of being strong all the damn time. Then don't be, not with me. Fall apart if you need to. I'll hold the pieces." And Emily cried, letting tears flow down her face as her phone rested against her cheek, Daniel's voice an anchor in the storm of her exhaustion. The night before her permanent move to San Francisco, her parents came from Charleston to say goodbye. Dorothy prepared a feast: fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, peach cobbler. The small table in Emily's apartment was crowded with food, love expressed in the only language Dorothy truly mastered. "I'm so proud of you, honey," William said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Your mother and I, We never imagined our girl would go so far. I haven't gone anywhere, Dad, Emily responded, taking his calloused hand. I'm just walking. You taught me to put one foot in front of the other, even when the path was hard. Dorothy sobbed quietly in the kitchen, pretending she was just washing dishes. Emily went to her, hugging her from behind. Don't cry, Mom. They're happy tears, Dorothy insisted, though they both knew it was more complex than that. It's just that my baby is growing so much that sometimes I forget when she stopped needing me. I'll always need you, Emily whispered. No matter what happens, always. Daniel arrived later that night after her parents had left. He brought an expensive bottle of wine they probably wouldn't open, and an expression Emily couldn't fully decipher. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Emily's heart raced. A ring? So soon? She wasn't ready, not after... Relax, Daniel said with a soft smile, reading her panic. It's not what you think. Inside the box was a key, simple silver on a thin chain. It's the key to my apartment here in New York, he explained, for when you come back, so you know you always have a place waiting for you, that you're not alone in this. Emily took the chain, the key cold against her palm. Daniel, and this, he continued, pulling out an envelope. Plane tickets, one every 2 weeks for the next 6 months. Already paid, flexible. I go there or you come here, but we see each other, regularly. Because 2 years can feel like an eternity or a breath depending on how we live them. Emily didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did both. Why are you like this? She asked, her voice muffled. Like what? So perfect, so patient, so completely the opposite of what I thought I deserved. Daniel pulled her into his arms, his chin resting on top of her head. I'm not perfect, Emily. I have flaws you'll discover and probably irritate you. I'm stubborn, sometimes too focused on work, don't know how to express emotions without a rehearsed speech. But what I am is someone who chooses every day to choose you, and I'll keep choosing you, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They spent that night intertwined on the couch, watching New York's lights flicker in the distance, savoring the last moments before distance became their new reality. Are you scared? Daniel asked at some point in the early morning. Terrified, Emily admitted. Are you? Also. But fear means it's important. And you, Emily Carter, are the most important thing that's happened to me in years. San Francisco welcomed her with fog rolling off the bay and the biggest challenge of her career. The government program was a monster of epic proportions. Reform the curriculum of 500 schools, train thousands of teachers, implement educational technology in communities that barely had connectivity, all while navigating California politics and tensions that made the foundation's dispute seem like child's play. Emily settled into a small apartment in the Mission District, with balconies full of plants she never had time to water and walls that echoed with her loneliness. She worked 16 hours a day, often forgetting to eat, surviving on coffee and the adrenaline of knowing the work mattered. On alternating weekends, Daniel arrived with his weekend bag and tired smile, or she flew to New York, and for 48 precious hours, the world reduced to just the two of them. They cooked together, explored hidden corners of San Francisco, made love with the desperation of people who knew time was limited. I miss you every day, Daniel confessed one night as they walked along Ocean Beach, the Pacific black and gleaming under the moon. Not just in the obvious ways. I miss your laugh in the office hallway. I miss stealing your coffee because you always make it better than mine. I miss looking up and just knowing you're there. Me too, Emily said, intertwining her fingers with his. Sometimes I wake up and for a second I forget you're 3,000 miles away, and remembering physically hurts. Is it worth it? He asked. This sacrifice, this distance. Is it worth what you're accomplishing here? Emily stopped, looking out at the ocean where waves crashed against the sand with eternal persistence. Yes, she answered finally. Because yesterday at a school in Oakland, a 9-year-old Vietnamese girl who barely spoke English read a complete paragraph for the first time. And her eyes, Daniel, they shone like she'd discovered magic. And I thought, this is why I'm here. For that shine. For all those shines no one else bothers to see. Then it's worth it, Daniel said simply. Everything that makes you shine like that is worth every mile between us. But the distance took its toll. Fights over the phone because tone was misinterpreted without facial expressions. Frustrations because schedules didn't sync, and days passed without a real conversation. The doubt that crept in on lonely nights. Was she still enough for him? Was he finding comfort in someone closer, more available? Emily never asked, but Daniel sensed it anyway. "Look at me," he said, during a particularly difficult video call. "Emily, look into my eyes. There's no one else. I don't want there to be anyone else. It's you. Only you. Do you believe me?" And she wanted to believe, forced herself to believe, because the alternative was living in constant paranoia that poisoned what they had. 6 months after arriving in San Francisco, Emily received news that changed everything. The program was working better than projected. Evaluation results showed significant improvements. The Secretary of Education was so impressed she wanted to expand the model nationally. But expansion meant more time. 2 years would become 4, maybe 5. And the question Emily had been avoiding finally demanded an answer. What was she willing to sacrifice for her career? And what was she willing to sacrifice for love? She flew to New York unannounced, appearing at Daniel's office on a rainy Tuesday in November. He was in a meeting, so she waited, watching the city from his panoramic windows, seeing millions of lives unfolding in miniature. When he walked in and saw her, his face lit up with such pure joy that Emily felt her heart expand and contract simultaneously. "What are you doing here?" he asked, kissing her as if it had been years instead of 2 weeks. "Not that I'm complaining. I need to talk to you. About the future. About us." The joy in his eyes was replaced by caution. "So that sounds serious." "It is," Emily confirmed, sitting on the leather couch in his office. "They offered me an extension of the program, 4 more years in San Francisco. It's an incredible opportunity, Daniel. The chance to implement changes that will affect millions of students across the country." "But," he said, because there was always a but. "But I don't know if we can survive 4 more years of this. I don't know if I can survive 4 more years of feeling like I'm constantly choosing between my purpose and my heart." Daniel was silent for a long moment, processing. Then he did something Emily didn't expect. He smiled. "What if you didn't have to choose?" "What do you mean?" "The foundation has an office in San Francisco that needs expansion. I've been considering relocating there anyway, overseeing operations directly. What if I was the one who moved?" Emily blinked, processing. "You'd leave New York? Your main base of operations for me?" "For us," he corrected. "Emily, I built an empire from scratch. I can run it from anywhere. But there's only one you, and only one chance to do this right. And if that means I pack my things and learn to surf, then that's exactly what I'll do." "Daniel, I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Because real love isn't just saying I support you. It's reorganizing your life to prove it." Emily felt tears burning in her eyes. "Are you absolutely sure?" Daniel knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "I've been sure of 3 things in my life. That I could build something important. That my mother deserved a better ending than she got. And that you, Emily Carter, are the person I want to build the rest of my life with. So yes, I'm completely, absolutely, irrevocably sure." And then he did what Emily had feared and desired for months. He pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm not asking you to marry me today," he said quickly. "I know marriage is complicated for you after everything, but I'm asking you to consider a future where we're both in San Francisco, building something together. And someday, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, this ring will be waiting." He opened the box. Inside was a simple but elegant ring, a gold band with a single diamond that caught the light and refracted it into tiny rainbows. "You don't have to answer now," Daniel continued. "Just consider it." Emily looked at the ring, then at Daniel, then back at the ring. And for the first time since the day of that failed wedding, the idea of marriage didn't bring her panic, but possibility. "Ask me again in a year," she said finally. "Not because I don't love you, but because I want to be completely certain that when I say yes, it's not because I'm running from an old wound, but because I'm running towards something new." Daniel closed the box and put it away. "A year, then. But Emily, whatever happens with the ring, I'm moving to San Francisco. That's not conditional. That's a choice I've already made." 3 months later, Daniel Harrison established his main office in San Francisco, in a modern building in Soma. Emily helped him unpack, hanging pictures and organizing books, laughing when he tried and failed to assemble furniture, feeling something like domestic happiness she thought she'd never have. 1 year later, almost to the day, Emily found herself in a place she never would have imagined. Back in Charleston, in the gardens of Middleton Place overlooking the Ashley River, surrounded by family, friends and flowers that perfumed the afternoon air with promises of new beginnings. But this time, she wasn't waiting for a groom who would never arrive. This time Daniel was there, impeccable in his suit but with eyes that only saw her, and in those eyes Emily saw reflected the entire journey they had traveled together. The ceremony was small, intimate, deliberately the opposite of that nightmare years ago. Only 50 people, the ones who truly mattered. Her parents, visibly emotional, crying tears of genuine joy. Mrs. Robertson, her old principal, seated in the front row with an embroidered handkerchief pressed against her lips. And Lily, now 10 years old, as flower girl, in a sky-blue dress and a smile that illuminated the entire garden. Emily had chosen a simple ivory silk dress, without the elaborate lace from before, without the ostentation that had proven so empty. Her beauty didn't need adornments. It shone from within, polished by years of fighting, falling and rising stronger each time. There was no priest, just a civil officiant who spoke about the nature of real commitment. Not perfect promises, but the daily choice to show up, to forgive, to grow together instead of apart. When the time came for vows, Emily spoke without notes, her voice clear across the garden where the sound of the river created a liquid symphony in the background. Daniel, when we met I was broken, convinced that my worth was measured by others' approval, that abandonment had permanently defined who I could be. You didn't save me from that, as many would assume. You weren't the prince rescuing the damsel in distress. You were the mirror that showed me I always had the strength to save myself. She paused, breathing deeply, aware that every eye was on her but feeling, for the first time in years, completely comfortable in that spotlight. You taught me that real love isn't finding someone who completes you, because that narrative assumes you were incomplete to begin with. Real love is finding someone who inspires you to complete yourself, and then choosing to walk together, not because you need to, but because you want to. I promise to choose you every day, not out of obligation, but for the privilege of building a life alongside someone who challenges me to be better, without ever making me feel that what I am now isn't enough. Tears flowed freely down many guests' cheeks. Dorothy sobbed openly. Even William, stoic as always, wiped his eyes discreetly. Daniel took her hands, and when he spoke, his voice trembled with contained emotion. Emily, I came to Charleston looking for a project, a way to make my wealth mean something more than numbers. I found instead a revolution, a woman who taught me that true strength isn't never breaking, but breaking and daring to put yourself back together despite the risk of breaking again. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help isn't giving up, that crying doesn't make you less powerful, but more human. He paused, looking at her with an intensity that made everything else disappear. I promise never to assume I know what you need. I promise to ask, listen, learn. I promise to celebrate each of your triumphs without needing to make them about me. And I promise, on the inevitable days when things are difficult, to remember this moment under the southern sky where we both chose to be brave together. They exchanged simple gold bands, no ostentatious diamonds, just polished metal symbolizing continuous cycles, without beginning or end. When the officiant declared them married, the kiss was soft but deep, a physical promise of all the verbal promises they had just made. The reception was in the gardens of Middleton Place, with tables under centuries-old live oaks and lights hanging like captured fireflies. The food was traditional low country, she-crab soup, shrimp and grits, hoppin' john, all prepared by women from the historic district who had known Emily since she was a child. There was no pretension, no menus in French or China that cost more than a monthly salary. Just food made with love, served by hands that understood feeding others was a sacred act. During dinner, Lily approached Emily timidly. "Miss Emily, can I read something to you?" Emily nodded, crouching down to the girl's level. Lily pulled a crumpled paper from her pocket and began to read in a clear voice. "You're like the butterflies I draw, Miss Emily. You started as a caterpillar, small and on the ground. Then came the dark days, like the cocoon, where no one could see you transforming. But now you've flown with colorful wings everyone can see, and you taught me that I can fly someday too. The entire garden fell silent. Emily hugged Lily, unable to speak through tears, aware that this moment, this child, represented exactly why all the pain had been worth it. Later, as guests danced to jazz and blues under the stars, Emily and Daniel escaped briefly to a quiet corner of the garden, where they could see Charleston's lights spread like a blanket of tiny lights across the landscape. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, his arm around her waist. "About how far I've come from that day at the altar," Emily answered. "About how that version of me couldn't imagine being here now. And about how I'm grateful for every difficult step of the journey, because it brought me exactly where I needed to be." "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Emily considered it honestly. "None. Not even Ryan. Because if he hadn't abandoned me, I never would have discovered who I could be when no one else defined my worth. I never would have met Elena in that town, or seen Lily's eyes shine when she understood that written words were doors to entire worlds. I never would have met you." Daniel kissed her temple, and in that simple gesture were years of accumulated understanding, of seeing someone completely and choosing them anyway, of building something stronger than initial passion because it was cemented in respect, admiration, and the willingness to do the hard work that real love requires. "You know what I learned," Emily said after a while. "That life isn't a straight line from beginning to happy ending. It's a bunch of beginnings, endings, and confusing middles. That day at the church was an ending, but it was also a beginning in disguise. And this day, this perfect moment, is also just a beginning. The end of the honeymoon, the start of the daily work of being a couple, the everyday battles of balancing careers and dreams and commitments." "Does it scare you?" Daniel asked. "Terrified," Emily admitted with a smile. "But I don't run from fear anymore. I embrace it, acknowledge it, and then do what I need to do anyway, because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action despite it." They returned to the party where Dorothy was trying to teach some of Daniel's friends from San Francisco how to shag dance, completely lost but happily willing. William was telling anyone who would listen about his little Emily and all her accomplishments, gloriously exaggerating every achievement. The night stretched on in music and laughter, in hugs from people Emily had known her whole life and those she had met on her new path. Two worlds, once separate, now coming together in celebration of a woman who had learned she could belong to both without betraying either. When it finally ended, when the last guest left and the lights were turned off one by one, Emily stood in the middle of the now empty garden, her dress gently billowing in the night breeze coming off the river. Daniel watched her from a distance, giving her this private moment, understanding that some farewells needed to be made in solitude. Emily closed her eyes, breathing in Charleston's air, so familiar and so loaded with memories. She remembered the girl she had been, dreaming under these same stars. The young woman devastated in a wedding dress, convinced her life had ended before it really began. The woman she had built from those ashes, learning that painful endings could be doors to miraculous beginnings. "Thank you," she whispered to the night air, to no one and everyone at once. "Thank you for breaking me. Thank you for every tear, every humiliation, every moment where I thought I couldn't bear one more day, because they taught me I could. They taught me I'm so much more than anyone, including me, ever imagined." She opened her eyes and there was Daniel, waiting, always waiting with that infinite patience that was one of his most precious gifts. "Ready?" he asked simply. Emily looked one last time at the garden, the city, the river that had formed the backdrop of her transformation. Then she took her husband's hand, the word still new and strange and wonderful in her mind. "Ready?" she confirmed. As they walked toward their future, Emily thought about butterflies, how they're born as caterpillars, how they must dissolve completely inside the cocoon before rebuilding themselves into something completely new, how the process of becoming who they're truly meant to be requires first undoing who they thought they should be. And she thought about Lily, about Elena, about the thousands of girls she would never meet, but whose lives she would touch through her work. Girls who would someday face their own battles, their own altars of broken hearts, their own moments of choosing between bitterness and growth. And she hoped, more than anything, that when their turn came to choose, they would remember that true strength doesn't come from never falling, but from rising every damn time, with grace, with determination, with the understanding that every scar is evidence, not of weakness, but of battles survived. Charleston's sky lightened with the first touches of dawn as Emily and Daniel left the gardens. A new day was beginning, full of uncertain possibilities and unguaranteed promises. But that was the nature of real life, Emily discovered. No guarantees, only choices. And she would choose every day to be brave, choose to love, choose to grow, choose to fly. Because in the end, that's what it meant to be truly free. Not the absence of fear or pain, but the willingness to face them and transform through them, like caterpillars becoming butterflies, carrying the colors of their struggles as iridescent wings. And somewhere in Charleston, in a small house in the historic district, a child's drawing of a teacher with butterfly wings still hung on the wall, a silent reminder that the best transformations begin with believing that flight is possible, even when you're surrounded by darkness, especially then. Where there's courage to begin again, there will always be butterflies waiting to dance.